Okay, today's lesson's almost a little bit sad given the current state of the world, but we're dealing with time zones, which is going to ask us a whole bunch of questions about travelling through different parts of the world, which of course at the moment we can't do. But still an understanding of time zones is important. So the world's time zones are in 24 sections, each of 15 degrees, and each time zone generally means an hour more or less than, each time zone going east is an hour more than the reference time zone, which is in Greenwich in England, and each time zone to the west is an hour less. And then once we get about 12 hours in front and 12 hours behind, we get to what's called the international date line. And so while it's the same time of day on either side of the international date line, it's different days. So if at the international date line right now it was 11 a.m, it'd be 11 a.m. on one side, it'd be 12 p.m. on the other side, but it'd be 2 different days. So some time zones change a little bit because of country borders. For instance, Australia, the Central Standard Time is only half an hour behind Eastern Standard Time, but it should be an hour behind. And there's a few little changes around the world. So we just need to know, I guess, what the abbreviation for Coordinated Universal Time is UTC. I think that's because the actual term is French, so the order changes. We just need to know how far either in front or behind of UTC a time zone is, and then we can work out questions around that. Within that too, we have to have a specific knowledge of the Australian time zones. So the 3 main time zones in Australia are Eastern Standard Time, Central Standard Time and Western Standard Time, and their relative positions in front of Greenwich are there. So Eastern Standard Time is 10 hours in front, Central's 9.5, and Western Standard Time is 8 hours in front. Which means that if I'm in Sydney, it's 2 hours earlier in the day in Perth. As well as this, obviously we have daylight savings, and most of you would know from living here that, for instance, Queensland does not have daylight savings and we do, so there's time changes if we go shopping at Robina in the summer holidays. So the states that have daylight saving get an extra hour added, so New South Wales becomes plus 11 in front of UTC during those summer months. Important to note that daylight savings time happens in South Australia, Victoria, Tasmania and New South Wales, but the Northern Territory, Queensland and Western Australia don't have daylight savings time. Okay, so the first question we've got here is, if it's midday in Beijing, what time of day is it in New York? So I find these things, much like previous lesson, the best way to do this is with a bit of a number line. And if we put 0 in the middle, and that's going to be Greenwich. And then we consider our position of each of the places. So if we're going to the east, we're going to add time. So if we go here and we look at Beijing, there's Beijing in the plus 8 hours section. So it's 8 hours east of London. So Beijing is going to be 8, that's going to be Beijing. And then New York is the other way. If we go from England, we'll go from the prime meridian, we get to New York, and New York's in this -5 bracket. So New York is 5 hours behind. So it's here. So we just need to know the difference between these two. I can see just by using a number line that I'm going to have to add the two, and that's what I like about the number line. But you can always take the most easterly and take away the other one. So the time difference should just be the most easterly. Learn how to spell, Mr. Chivers. Minus the westerly one. I might say most easterly minus most westerly. Okay, so if I do that, the most easterly here is 8, and I'm taking away -5, which is our most westerly. And of course, if I take away a negative, I end up actually making that a positive. So minus a minus becomes a positive, so I get 13 hours. Now, if you just feel more comfortable with using the number line and seeing that the gap there is obviously 13 wide. That's great, use that method. But obviously, I just wanted to show that if we use some maths with it, it works just as well. So the next question we've got is Frank's flight home from Rome to Hong Kong, left Rome at 1400 Rome time, so that's 2 p.m. And it took 11 hours, and what time was the time in Hong Kong when he arrived? So my personal preference with this is to deal with the time it took for the travel first, and then deal with the time change next. So what I'm going to work out first is, well, what time was it in Rome when he landed in Hong Kong, and then I can deal with the time difference later. So if we go 1400 hours plus 11 hours, well, that's going to be 2500 hours. That doesn't make much sense. So it's actually going to be 1 a.m. And it doesn't say what day it is, so the next day. Okay, and then now we can put Hong Kong and Rome on a number line. So I think both of these are going to be east of the prime meridian in England. So let's go have a look in that map. Well, at the top now, obviously this is a little bit harder because we don't have those names marked, but there's the big boot that is Italy. So Rome looks like it's in the +1 zone because the whole of Italy looks like in that one. So I'll put that down here on my timeline. So at 1 I've got Rome. And then as we go along, we're looking for Hong Kong. Once again, that's probably something that a few of you aren't aware of, but Hong Kong's sort of around about this zone here. So what's that in? That's in the +8 zone. So Hong Kong's here at +8. So we're looking at this distance in here. So to find the time difference, we're just going to take the most westerly, which is Hong Kong, and take away the most easterly, which is Rome. So that's 7 hours. So in other words, it's 7 hours earlier in Hong Kong than it is in Rome. So therefore, 1 a.m. plus 7 hours, well, that's going to be 8 a.m. and obviously that's on the next day. Okay. The final example just uses our Australian time zones. So I have a couple of parents that have become grey nomads, or they're not travelling around just at the moment for the same reason no one's travelling around. And they're in Western Australia. And if I want to call them at 7 a.m. in Summerine Casino, what time will it be in Karratha where they're camped? So if we look at that map of Australia, it's Western Australia is always 2 hours different from Eastern Australian time. So here we've got Eastern Australian time is at +10, Western Australian time is at +8. So there's always 2 hours difference. But at this particular point in time, we're talking about summer, so daylight savings would apply in New South Wales where I am, but it doesn't apply in Western Australia where they are. So I need to allow for that. So, but with daylight savings, it's going to be 3 hours. So in other words, New South Wales is 3 hours in front of Western Australia at that time of the year. So that means if New South Wales is 3 hours in front, that means that Western Australia is 3 hours behind. So I have to take 7 a.m. minus 3 hours. Well, that's going to give me 4 a.m., which is probably not a very kind time to ring my parents, but I'd probably do it anyway, just, to annoy them. And then we've got a little monkey down there for some reason. Enjoy the monkey. Rightio, so hooking into those questions there that are set out in OneNote, most of the questions and any question that you get in your assessment will actually specify or have a map there. So it'll actually specify how far in front of UTC or behind UTC a particular place is. But just get used to that idea. I think for the first few we're just doing time conversions, and then afterwards there might be some questions involving travelling. Well, that might be more in the next particular one. You might not get many about travelling this time, so you're just dealing with actual time differences. Make sure you're careful with your AMs and your PMs, and make sure you're careful with what day of the week it is. If you travel at certain times, you might find that the day changes. And that's really all there is to do with that one. Have fun.